So I kind of want to give a little follow-up here to the Shedeur Sanders video that I made that was 35 minutes long. I know my videos are too long, but like I said, this is my therapy. This is just me getting thoughts out, which is something I've never really done before, and it helps me. So to anybody who might have suffered through that, I apologize, and thank you for sticking with me. People still seem to be having issues a couple days later understanding why Shedeur did not go in the first 3 rounds, and why he wound up going 144th overall in either the 5th or 6th round to the Cleveland Browns, which is not an ideal destination. As an organization, they made a lot of mistakes since their reboot in 1999, so we're talking about 25 years plus of failure now, and the quarterback situation's never been good, no matter who owned the team, who was the GM, and now he's going to the quarterback room with 5 different quarterbacks. Now, one of them is Deshaun Watson, obviously with his legal trouble and now torn ACL. Even with the payment, he's probably more trouble than he's worth. So I don't see him ever coming back to the Browns. Although with that organization, you just never know. Joe Flacco's there. He's a year younger than me. He's 40, and I can't imagine even trying to throw a ball 10 yards down the field. I've never been an athlete, but the thought of taking some of those hits is pretty crazy. So I don't know how long he's going to be there. But, they also have Kenny Pickett, who, didn't really pan out in Pittsburgh. But, of course, he's behind Justin Fields and Russell Westbrook. And they also drafted another quarterback whose name escapes me, a much less heralded college quarterback before Shedeur. And judging by the reactions of the coach and the GM when the draft was announced, you can't help but feel like that was probably done by the owner. The owner probably wanted to get Shedeur to try to help the Cleveland Browns brand, which is, like I said, not that great. And I hate that for the fans of Cleveland. I'm not here to dump on Cleveland. They're blue-collar fans, and during one of their playoff losses in the 80s, one of their many brutal losses for the original Cleveland Browns when they were really good and kept running to John Elway, he said, the fans of Cleveland deserve better, and they do. So I'm not here to dump on them, but the fact is, it's just that's not been a good organization for a while. I know how that goes. I'm a Panthers fan. We're running the same thing right now. After some years of respectability, never a championship, but respectability. Even though last season was a success for us, it's not good. So, people still don't understand why he went that far and why now he's in, like I said, possibly the worst place for a quarterback. And like I said, to me, it's just, of course, now there's, cries of racism and collusion, because Lord knows, they're all going to band together and allow other teams to win just to fit their narrative. So it's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. This idea that we're scared of a confident black man. The league's been full of confident black men as long as I've been alive and long before that. And we've loved these confident black men and rooted for them, including Shedeur's father, Dion, who, especially as kids, we loved. And a lot of people loved. He captured the imagination. That's why we still know him and care about him. He hasn't played a snap in over 20 years, and that was well after he was cooked. All his greatness came in the 90s. So, we're talking, 25, 30 years since he was last, doing anything relevant in the NFL, and we still remember him and love him. And so, that has nothing to do with it. And again, I just can't get over the way people are glossing over the fact that he takes too many sacks. That's the one thing. People will always say, well, yeah, that's the one thing he needs to work on. That's the one flaw. He takes too many sacks. He holds on to the ball too long. And they just kind of gloss over that. And that's one of the worst things you can do as a quarterback in any level, really, but especially in the NFL. The NFL is getting more and more. Teams are really starting to bolster their defensive lines. No matter how much of the physicality try to take out of the NFL, games will always be won and lost in the trenches. We saw that in the Super Bowl big time. Philly's D-line just dominated. Didn't give Patrick Mahomes a chance to do much. That allowed them to drop a lot of people into coverage. He could run around as much as he wanted to, but nobody was going to be very well open. And, Kansas City just never had a chance against that D-line. Well, if you've got a quarterback who's going to hold on to the ball and is not really all that mobile comparatively, that's a problem. That's a big problem. People just kind of gloss over. It's like, oh, yeah, that's the one thing he has to work on. Well, that's a big thing. That's a big thing you got to work on, You can have the fastest car in the world, but if you can't get into gear, it's going nowhere. And no matter how good Shedeur may or may not be as a quarterback, if you're holding on to the ball, we all throw the ball the same from our backs. We can't. And so that's one thing I don't understand why that got glossed over so much by so many, and is not being talked about more as a reason why he probably wasn't seen as a great prospect. And the other thing you have to realize, I know he put up some good numbers in college, but his father ran that, and Dion ran that Colorado program strictly as a avenue to get his son and Travis Hunter drafted. That offense was all about showcasing Shedeur and what he can do, and to get him to put up numbers to try to get in the NFL. NFL teams aren't going to do that. They're not going to help you out. They're not going to do what they're not going to sacrifice everything to make one player look good the way Dion was willing to, and the way you can with a college program like Colorado that, it's been a long time since they really had much to talk about. So that's something, you have to understand, and so you kind of have to take his numbers with a grain of salt. That team never ran the ball. They never tried to run the ball. Sorry for going Jim Moore on us. We didn't run the ball. We didn't try to run the ball. We sucked. To me, that rant was way better than the playoffs rant. But that's another story. But, that's just, so you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. And then, the fact that he's already been exalted and already been, crowned. People say, well, he's, we don't like his confidence. We're scared of his confidence. No, we're scared of the fact that he's already seeing himself as this great elite player when he's really not shown it, and really, not what you'd want in your locker room. You need people that are in there that are humble and every day willing to prove something new, no matter what they did last week. If they're bad last week, they need to be there to prove they can be good again. If they were good last week, they need to go there proving they can be good again. It's just this is kind of how it goes. And like I said, and then you throw in the Dion thing. Anytime Shedeur's not starting, that he's not sorry, trying to get the sun out of my face here. Anytime he's not going to be starting, as soon as the starting quarterback has a bad game, it's like, well, why isn't Shedeur in there? Dion's going to be talking, and he's already saying, my son don't take a back seat to nobody. Well, I mean, that's just, he's done his son a real disservice. I mean, it's a real competition between him and LeBron as to who's done their son the biggest disservice this year, and as far as for their future. And like I said, I don't know. I mean, is Shedeur talented enough? I mean, we don't know. That's the problem. You don't really want to go with the unknowns. And does he have potential to do that? We don't know, because he's never been in a situation where he's really had to prove himself. He's always was going to have that quarterback position. He was always going to, have a offense and a team that was built around him strictly to showcase him and his ability. And you're never going to come across that in the NFL. And again, this whole intimidated by him. We've had so many confident black men come into the league and be embraced because they produce. Whether you are racist and don't like that, which, I mean, that's your problem. If they can do that for the good of your team, you're going to cheer. I don't care who you are. So, like I said, these narratives are ridiculous, and to me, his slide makes sense. And like I said, did all 32 teams just happen to come across the same conclusion? Yeah, it's very much possible. And then, not taking the interview seriously. A job interview is everything. I'm getting ready to go into my job now. I mean, it's a medical care job. I've been in the medical field profession since 2011, 14 years now, and I've approached this interview a few months ago for this job after being in my last job for over 7 years like it was the most important thing ever. You know, I had to make sure that I sold myself and let them know, you know, I might have done all this for all these years, but, you know, I'm here to keep doing that. Which, of course, I have to, because, you know, I want to keep paying my mortgage and, you know, not have my house and cars repossessed. But that's just me, you know. So, you know, again, just kind of glossing over, well, his interviews weren't that good or they didn't like the interviews. Well, guess what? If your potential employer doesn't like your interview, you're not going anywhere. And then, of course, like I said, you know, the legendary brand, like I said, there's people behind that. There's millions and millions of dollars behind that. And to sit there, it's going to be a problem. That's all there is to it. There's going to be a problem because people are going to say, why are we spending all this money for a guy that's not playing? And they're going to make waves and they're going to make trouble and cause a lot of trouble for the organization. So to me, the whole thing makes sense. To me, the whole thing makes perfect sense. And like I said, it just shows you how content hungry the media is. It's all about hot takes 24/7. Well, Shedeur, if he was out there starting, they would have every good game would be he's, you know, going to pass Tom Brady. He's going to, you know, pass Joe Montana. He's going to pass everybody. Every bad game, oh, what were they thinking? You know, Dion did this. And it's just, you know, they want the circus. And an NFL team in the locker room with 53 men from very different backgrounds, they don't want the circus. And like I said, to me, the whole thing makes perfect sense, but that's just me. Like I said, I'd be interested to hear your comments and what you think, if you agree or if there's something I'm missing. But I don't see why they glossed over the fact that he takes too many sacks. I don't see why they, you know, have glossed over a lot of things. So I don't have anything against Shedeur. Like I said, he seems like a good kid. I think he's been misguided in a number of ways. I hope he can, you know, get it together. You know, it's going to take years of being humbled, which, by the way, you do have to be humbled because out in the field, you're going to get humbled, and you have to prove that once being humbled, you can get back out there and get your head back on your shoulders and do well. And like I said, I hope he succeeds, but it's going to take a bit. So, and it doesn't surprise me. So, thank you guys for watching. That's just my take on that, and let me know what you think. I'll talk to you later.